Otago University, did a law degree and an accounting degree, and came here, got a job. I do criminal law, mostly defence work. I also do other sorts of legal work as well. Only ever been involved in 2 murder trials, and the other one was last week, so I'm up on the subject at the moment. But in terms of what you girls are thinking about, the law of provocation is really complicated, and some people are really pleased it's gone, and some people out there are not pleased it's gone, because I'm a defence lawyer, and it just means that one more defence has been taken away from us. Why tells me that you guys are kind of socially debating or looking at the debate around why it was repealed, and as I say, for me, and people like Peter Williams, QC, who want to keep it, it's sad that it's gone, because it's one less defence available. And one of the real bummers is that, unlike America, we don't have degrees of murder. We don't have first, second and third degree murder. It's murder or it's not. And so, you know, you might be really sympathetic if you're on the jury about somebody killed in circumstances that you're sympathetic to, like they were called something really upsetting that really angered them, and they lost self-control, and they killed, and they're normally a nice person. But because the law of provocation is gone, they get found guilty of murder instead of manslaughter, which is the next thing down. There's a big difference between murder and manslaughter. If you get convicted of murder, that used to mean you get a life sentence, and life used to mean 10 years in jail before you're eligible for parole. There's still a minimum non-parole period of 10 years if you get convicted of murder, but these days you start getting more and more and more. It's quite common on the news you hear them saying, oh, I got a minimum non-parole period of 16 years or 17 years or 13 years. That's because their crime's really bad or they're really nasty or it was really awful. The judge can increase the minimum non-parole period, so that means they can't apply for parole for that amount of time. Whereas if they really had been provoked, and if the defence of provocation or partial defence of provocation had succeeded, and you've got murder reduced down to manslaughter, they could get as little as 3 to 5 years. Because manslaughter, the sentence is just as flexible as manslaughter covers everything from me accidentally pushing you off a wall, you falling down and banging your head and dying, oops, you know. And that's not that blameworthy, but I still killed you and I'm still guilty of manslaughter. I'd get maybe 3 or 4 years. But if I went down for murder, I'd be getting at least 10. The law of provocation was really quite complicated. Have you girls got the wording of provocation, how it used to work in court? Do you know what the words were that we used?
They've all now.
I've got about 10 copies here, which if you want you can hand around.
One person from each group. Just come up and grab one. We agree.
You got it, James.
What I've got is the law on provocation. So there's 4 pages. So if you grab 4 pages, you'll have one about 4 So the law of provocation. I've got a couple of pages which talk about how it's used. So there's 10 pages.
So maybe 2 per group.
Oh, yeah. Charlotte.
So it's 8. Yeah.
2 per group. Oh, 2 per group.
Yeah. So grab one, Charlie.
Front page has got compendium history on it.
Who's Deanna?
Wait, you took one.
I have.
And you kind of need to, I think, understand the law to understand the debate around it, because it's not a simple law.
Hurry up.
And these are things that juries have to get their heads around. You know, people like you or your parents or your friends, once you're 18, are on the jury and you're sitting in judgment of someone, and a judge is saying, this is the law and this is how you apply it. And I'll try and explain it to you. I'll get it confused with you. So, Section 169 of the Crimes Act was repealed in 2009. Provocation. The culpable homicide that would otherwise be murder, so if you kill someone, it would normally be murder, can be reduced to manslaughter if the person who caused the death did so out of provocation. Sounds really simple. Everyone knows what provocation is. Well, what is provocation? anything done or said may be provocation if, in the circumstances of the case, it was sufficient to deprive a person of having the power of self-control of an ordinary person. That's what's called an objective test. Were you an ordinary person and did you actually lose self-control? So that's you guys sitting in judgment of why did she actually lose self-control as a normal Kiwi. But otherwise having the characteristics of the offender. So you've got to think, okay, that was an ordinary person, but now we're going to look at her particular circumstances. And she might say, for example, and I've got it here in the next little case that I referred to, she might say that she's from Samoa, and she came back from Samoa, and her husband had been sleeping with another person, and she got really angry and she lost control, and she killed that person. So that provocation makes sense, you know, you have to think about the normal objective person. But in this case, the Samoan case, in Samoan culture, Samoan culture believes that if you are unfaithful to your partner, it can cause your children to get sick. That's pretty special to the Samoan in this case. So that's a subjective thing. You got to look at that person and their culture. And this person, in this case, came back from Samoa because his child was in hospital because he was sick. And at that time, his wife said, "Oh, I've been sleeping with your best mate." And he went around and killed him. Yeah, so it's that mixed objective subjective test. So you look at the ordinary New Zealander, and then you qualify them by what their particular beliefs are. Are they the sort of person who would be particularly provoked in those circumstances? Or, you know, turn it around to something like racism. Is it someone who's a white middle class cop in South Auckland who just gets so sick of being called white pig trash, you know, he gets completely wound up by that sort of racism. He loses self-control and kills. So it's a complicated scenario. You look at what the normal person would do, then you've got to qualify it with a subjective test of what that person did. And then you folks have to decide, if you're on the jury, whether it did in fact deprive them of the power of self-control and induce them to commit homicide. So you folks on the jury need to decide that. Whether there's evidence of provocation is a question of law. So before you can even mention it to a jury, you've got to get some facts out there in the courtroom, and then say to the judge, "Hey, look, here's this evidence of the someone being unfaithful to someone else and someone being angry about it. There's some evidence about the culture which says that infidelity causes sickness in children." And then the judge might permit you to allow provocation to go to the jury. Might allow you to talk to the jury and say, "Hey, we can use this defence of provocation," but only if there's enough evidence of it. And so if the judge does allow you to do it, under subsection 4, whether it did in fact deprive the guy of self-control and induce him to commit the homicide is up to you guys as the jury. It's a question of fact. So you've got your evidence about it, you've got the judge allowing you to use it, then you've got the jury deciding whether in fact it was provocation or not. And that case that I've given you, the Samoan one, he got convicted 3 times of murder. There must have been a retrial for whatever reason twice. And when I talked about there being a Samoan belief of sickness in the children if you're unfaithful, of course, hey, there was actually no evidence of that, so we're not going to allow that to become part of your decision making.
Oh,
There
yeah.
has to be evidence of it.
You
So
get
that guy got convicted 3 times for killing his best mate who was sleeping with his wife. I thought that was a bit mean, but he did. He punched him, he went down, banged his head. If he left it there, he probably would have got off on manslaughter, but then he stopped on his head, so. Stomped on his head.
Oh, okay.
And then the other extreme is this case of Hallett. There's a guy called Menzies Hallett convicted last year in the Rotor Report of the cold case murder.
We went over this. This is one of those cases in the booklet I gave you.
Yeah.
Which is the one?
Hallett, yeah, Menzies Hallett. He shot a guy, I think, in the 70s. And he tried to run the defence of provocation by saying to the court, "I was provoked because he didn't come out and sell me some oil for my car. So I got angry and I was provoked and I lost self-control and I killed him." And the court said, "No, you can't run provocation."
Oh, yeah.
Right? So those are 2 completely different examples of how you might think in one case, yeah, provocation is fair enough, it should be allowed to be run. And on the other extreme, you're going, "Oh, that's rubbish, it shouldn't be allowed to be run." And it wasn't. So that kind of explains how it actually works in real life. So it wasn't simple. Hopefully I haven't overly confused you. But you've got to understand there's a whole lot of social dynamics going on, and there's a lot of inquiry into what really happened and what the normal person would do, modified by what that person would do. And in that Samoan case, they also said, hey, Judge, at that time, the public in New Zealand were really against provocation because of the Weatherston case. You guys, I think, already talked about that. And that's really what caused the big uproar about it, because they said that basically he was such a weasel, he shouldn't have been allowed to run provocation. They said he was such a sensitive little soul that the way she treated him provoked him. And that really offended a lot of people, that it was even allowed to be run as provocation. But there was evidence of it, and the judge did allow it, and so the judge to decide whether it was to be run or not.
What was the evidence that they used in that Weatherston?
I can't remember exactly, but
What could it possibly have been?
he was painted as someone who had no confidence, and she would run him down, and she would upset him easily, and he was someone who was easily upset and was particularly fragile and frail.
Who carried a knife with him in his pocket for self-defence? Hey, we read that. Was that in their case? It was a...
But whatever it was enough that the judge allowed the lawyers to argue provocation with the jury. So it wasn't just dreamed up, like that skinning. It didn't work, of course, but it provoked a lot of debate in public, and really resulted in this law being abolished. And so in the Samoan case, they said, hey, at the time we run this trial, the public are against provocation, so we can get a fair trial. And the court said, oh, gosh, get on with it. So, questions? Confused?
Questions asked, because don't ask me, because I'll confuse you even more. So, if you're a defence lawyer are you part of the Law Society? So they were against it? Why?
Because it's taking away another defence. It's taking away a tool that we can use to defend you in circumstances where you should have the ability to use that defence. I mean, in the Samoan case, don't you feel sorry for the guy who came back from overseas to see his wife was sick in the hospital and found out she was sleeping around with his best mate and punched him? Didn't mean to kill him.
No, just stuck in his head.
Should have been keeping extra tabs on his wife as well.
But he still had, so he couldn't run provocation as a defence, but he still had another defence available, and that was lack of murderous intent. So you can still say, oh, I wanted to hurt him, I didn't want to kill him. And that could have reduced it to murder and manslaughter. So he's not completely without defences, but he's without the defence of provocation, which would have fitted, or did fit at that time, really nicely in that case, but it just didn't work. So yeah, lawyers are against anything that makes it harder to win, basically. Yeah.
All right, there. Got that, girls?
Yeah.
These are your quotes coming in. So, because this is what I couldn't, how's the Law Society different from the Law Commission?
The Law Society is like a membership group that the lawyers belong to. It's like a committee. We all are required to belong to the Law Society and they represent our interests. The Law Commission is a separate independent government organisation run by a usually retired High Court judge. And they're kind of inquisitorial. They're out there making inquiries of the public and of the lawyers and of the victims. They're running an inquisition, gathering information, and then making recommendations to the government on law change. So they're sort of an independent body who they have a huge impact. Actually, they make a lot of recommendations about law changes in the government.
Listen.
Yeah, the government isn't here.
So when that provocation thing came up, it was the Law Society that put in heaps of opposition to it. They were one of the, they didn't get really obvious. Questions, girls, hurry up. Come on. Because I don't want to ask them more. So a group like Women's Refuge would be somebody who would be against it. So voice that they were by.
They would want provocation to go on here. Because they represent victims. And they would want to get rid of anything that made it harder.
And what do you have to do to become a QC Just because I know it stands for Queen's Council, but
Yeah.
one of the girls that they're looking at, and they'll take it from the point of view of Peter Williams QC, who was against it.
Yeah.
So what is QC? I know it's Queen's Council, but how do you get that?
You've got to have a minimum of, I think I saw this the other day, 11 years experience as a lawyer. Some random figure, I saw it the other day for the first time. And you've got to, now and again they have, they say, right, we've got expressions of interest of people who want to be appointed QC. So I could write in and say, I think I'm really good, I've done some high profile cases, I've had these huge successes, well regarded. Basically you've got to be about the best in your field, and you apply for the appointment to be a Queen's Counsel, and a committee considers your application, interviews you and your colleagues, and decides. And basically if you're awarded this title, you charge a lot more money, because it's a signal that you are very, very good at what you do. It's generally, doesn't generally go to criminal lawyers so much. We're kind of the poor people of the legal fraternity. We're treated like rubbish, we're badly paid, we do the scummy jobs that a lot of people don't like. And there's not many criminal defence lawyers who get appointed to be Queen's Counsel, but Peter Williams is one of them. He's been around forever, he's a big time fighter for the underdog. Or maybe QC in total. He's most recent appointment of the criminal lawyers, but he also does a lot of other work. But yeah, just basically make it the best of the best.
So when they brought that provocation thing in, so now if you were convicted, is it before 2009 of a crime, you can still use it?
Yeah.
Is that right?
It's like that Tomlin fella, this case here for IL.
I know what?
His case was last dealt with in 2012. The death happened in February 2009. So each of his trials, he was allowed to run a provocation because the alleged crime happened before provocation.
So is that fellow in jail?
He will be now. And that's why Menzies Hallett had to go trying to run it, because even though his trial was only last year, he killed the guy.
Yeah, if you didn't know the Menzies Hallett case, do you want to tell them about it? I know a little bit. So back in the 70s, out at...
It was down there, Turangi.
Yeah, and down by Turangi, you know where the Burger King and that is in Turangi on the way down?
Yeah.
So there was a Māori guy and he was young, father.
Yeah, he ran the gas station.
He ran the gas station and this guy pulled up and, yeah.
The guy wouldn't open the gas station to give him some oil for his car, which he really needed. So he shot him, killed him, drove away, bragged about it, told his wife, and she, at that time in law, the law was you can't give evidence against your spouse. So even if husband bashes wife can't give evidence against them. And
It was what the law used to be.
he's not allowed to, even if she wants to. And then the law later changed, but I became a lawyer pretty years ago. It was that a wife was not compellable against the husband. So she could give evidence if she wanted to, but she said, no, I'm married, I choose not to give evidence, even though I gave a statement to the cops saying he beat me up. They couldn't make her give evidence. So anyway, wifey had been told that he killed this guy, and she couldn't give evidence against him. And then when the law changed, she could give evidence against him. And so the cops looked at it again and said, oh, cool, let's charge him now. The law changed.
And he got charged last year and was found guilty. And he's old, he's like...
He's in his 60s.
60s?
Yeah.
But this happened...
Dad used to go sailing with him.
Yeah, this happened in the 70s.
Better give him some oil.
Since you not being able to give evidence against your spouse, in which cases would that help?
That's
Why was it there?
It was there. It's really old-fashioned. It was kind of the sanctity of marriage and Christianity, and that I think it was wrongly believed that it was the sanctity of marriage, that one spouse could not give evidence against the other, even if they wanted to. That's an interesting one, that, because they have later changed to, they could, so they're not compellable. And in many cases, the wife would come along and say, yeah, nah, I don't want to say anything. And these days, when the wife or girlfriend comes along and says, yeah, nah, I don't want to say anything, the cops get stuck into them and say, well, hang on, that night you signed a statement which says he did this, this and this. Hey! And they go, oh, that wasn't true. And the judge generally says in his judgment, yep, what you wrote that night is true, and he's lying to me now, trying to get him off the hook. Bad luck.
Over here, girls, is trying to get some men or something.
It happens a lot in about 80%
my
of
man didn't
cases.
do anything.
So the girl tries to wind it back down and let it go later on. Because he said, sorry, blah, blah, stay on board with that track.
Have you ever been in a situation where you're defending someone who you know is like blatantly in the wrong, and you don't want to defend them, but you just have to?
I always get asked this question.
I feel like
I'm
that's
just going to go and get my drink.
Well, the answer's a really good lesson I learned about 3 years into the job. It's a bit yucky. I had this guy come and see me, and he was charged with doing horrible things to his 7-year-old son. And the son was interviewed on video, and so I went and watched the video, and the 7-year-old son gave a really graphic account of what Daddy had done to him, and I thought, yuck. And I basically believed the kid. And in the months that followed, as we progressed towards the trial, I didn't really give this guy a lot of attention, because I judged him. And he kept saying, oh, it wasn't me, it wasn't me. I think you're right. And just before the trial, it transpired that this kid's mother, who's my client's ex, had a boyfriend who had done it to the kid and made him point a finger at Daddy for his sister doing the same. And I thought, shit, I judged him. My mistake. It's not my job to judge. And I've had people confess to stuff to me, and to plots that they've never done, covering for other people. So I mean, the lesson I learned was it's not my job to judge. I don't know anyone's guilty. If you come to me and say, oh, I'm charged with drink driving, give it a crack, eh, try and get me off, I'll go, of course. You know, I'll put the police to the proof and see if they did all their tests right and treated you right and gave you a Bill of Rights advice and all that. Nothing dodgy or weird about that. I know you did it. You've got no qualms in putting the police to the proof though. But if you tell me, well, I did do this crime, but I'm going to give evidence saying I didn't, I can't put you up on the stand. Because that's what's called suborning perjury. I'm supporting your line.
So sometimes you know they're guilty of it, but you try to kind of lessen their... 90-something% of the job is damage control. You know, you're getting lesser charges or a better result or negotiating an outcome. So most of it's about relationships with cops and the negotiation skills.
Who wants to be a lawyer? I know there's some of you. Put your hands up if you're looking at law. Oh, true, only one.
That's what I said with Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend a future in criminal law. It's got really negative. It's gotten really negative in recent years. You get paid less, you're treated worse, the criminals are more scummy, there's pee out there. It makes people really aggressive and really nasty, more demanding. It's my nature has always been to help people, and I'm getting a bit cynical and tired, for 20-something years, but they're getting worse. And a lot of, particularly women, get involved in as lawyers and do a lot of family court work, custody and access, seeing the kids and getting protection orders for the women and protecting them against their blokes. And that's sort of the same sort of wanting to help people, but it's really taxing emotionally and really tiring, and you're always dealing with sadness and bitterness and grief and, you know. And so I don't, as a lifestyle choice, I don't overly recommend it. But you can have a varied practice. I do all sorts of other work too. I do a fair bit of employment work, so I represent people who have been fired or bosses who want to fire someone or have fired someone. I represent some big trucking companies, so I look after their drivers and I get them work licenses when they've lost their licenses. I do a lot of suing and being sued, which means you're learning all about the subject matter of your case. I've had to learn about how to grow certain plants, I've learned how to pull marine diesel engines apart. You've got to totally learn your subject matter when you're arguing about it on behalf of your client. And that's interesting. You get paid reasonably well for it. So that's litigation on a different clever stuff, smarter stuff, interesting stuff.
Just don't break the law. It's quite simple, really.
Don't get caught.
What are you laughing
Hey.
for? You hear that? Don't get caught.
You don't get caught, Charlotte.
I'm also, I'm a youth advocate. I'm a youth advocate, so I deal with 14 to 16-year-old inclusive in town who get charged with stuff, and that's part of the job I really like. I like dealing with young people, and it's sort of an opportunity sometimes to turn kids around, push them in a different direction. But more often than not, you find by the age of sort of 14, then you're already getting to the bottom of the cliff. I've been around the traps a lot more than that. But it's a really neat part of the job, I really feel that. So, it's good.
Just one question on the provocation thing. Did you guys at any stage of the Law Society when that bill was at the, what was it? Government?
First reading,
The
whatever.
first reading of that, did you guys